To our subject professor, Dr. Wilfred Alava, our dear classmates, maayong gabi kanatong tanan. Before anything else, let me introduce first myself. I am Fernan Q. Abragan, presently connected at Mindanao State University at Naawan. Tonight, I am tasked to discuss on assessing learning. In relation to the integration of multimedia in our classroom, in this presentation, I am using OBS. And later on, I would be sharing one of the softwares that can be used by the teachers in assessing the learning of our students. In this presentation, we would be guided by these 4 questions. The first one is what to know. The second one is what to check. The third one is what to prepare. And the last one is what to do. Alright, let us first answer the first guide question. Our first guide question is what to know. Under this guide question, we have plenty of questions to answer. The first question is, what is assessment of learning? Assessment of learning is, by the way, a process of gathering both quantitative and qualitative data, which could be described what the learner knows and what the learners can do as a result of our instruction. You know what? It is needed. Assessment is needed in order for us to know what they can do after which we delivered our instruction. Now, the question is, why do we need to assess learning? We have purposes. Why do we need to assess the learning of our students? And these are just 3. The first one is we need to assess for learning, which emphasizes the need for assessment to monitor, of course, which could be done before, during, and even after instruction. Assessment for learning needs examination of growth as well as the development in the process of learning in order to ensure that the students attain the essential competencies. What we call it now in the new normal education as MELC. What does it stand for? Meaning to say, we would be teaching the most essential learning competencies to our students. That's for assessment for learning. The second purpose is assessment of learning, which only emphasizes that certification of the attainment of the essential competencies set for the students in a certain grade level. And the last one is assessment as learning. What is this? Assessment as learning emphasizes the need for students to be trained to monitor and reflect on the attainment of their own learning goal, which should be the same as which the curriculum intends to respond to. Now, what to target when assessing learning? Remember, classmates, that when assessing learning in flexible modalities, we have to aim for a holistic one. Aim to be holistic as the curriculum targets as well as for the students' holistic development. There could be 5 targets. The first one is knowledge, reasoning, third, skills. The fourth one is product. And the last one is the affect. So what are these? So for knowledge, as we all know, that it tells the facts, concepts, principles, theories, processes, and context that one should know as a result of instruction. The second one is reasoning. It tests that one understands and explains knowledge gained from instruction. Our third skill is the skills, which would require demonstration of what one knows and is capable of applying in real life. The next one is the product, which requires evidence of what one should know and is capable of producing it in real life. And the last one is the affect, which refers to the attitudes and values desired of the learner to possess as a result of instruction. Because remember that we are not creating an intellectual monster. Now, in the way of targeting these aspects for us to be able to know that our students are really learning holistically, we have this, what do we call as guiding principles when we get to assess the learning of our students. So we have here in our illustration, from that curriculum, we deliver instruction. And how would we know that our delivered instruction is being absorbed, is being learned by our students? Of course, we have to assess our students. Remember, class, that we are now in pandemic. So it could be that our way of assessing our learners during face-to-face is different. And the way how would we assess our learners in today's time is different as well. Now, in different, I mean in the new normal education, we could actually assess our students based from our teacher's assessment. It could be based from our parents' assessment. It could be based from our peers' assessment. Because in today's time, this is a collaborative effort among stakeholders involved in making our students learn a certain concept. Now, we have these guiding principles. The first principle is it should be purpose-driven. Have we practiced this one or not? What is this? Meaning, when we get to assess, it should be purpose-driven. That when we assess learning, we have to begin with a clear purpose as to what we aim for. That's the first principle. Are we practicing this? If yes, that's good. If not, we have to. Second one, it should be what? It should be valid. It should be reliable. Which means that when we gather data, we have to see to it that they come from multiple sources, not just one. Remember that. Our next principle is it should be authentic, which means, guys, that whatever tool or task that is designed for assessment, it should reflect what the students experience in real life. See? The next one is fair or inclusive, which means that whenever a tool is designed, it should reflect a language or situation that the learners could relate. Another guiding principle is it should be practical. That, for example, whenever a tool is designed, it should be used. It should be administered, which would ease to avoid wasting of time as well as the resources. Next one is it should be continuous, which means that the data collection about students' learning should happen before, during, and of course, after instruction. For what reason? In order for us to be able to see the pattern and the relationship in information gathered to arrive at sound judgment as well as decision. Next one is it should be balanced, which means that when we gather data about students' learning, we have to use varied, appropriate tools as well as methods. Before we forget, we also have to be what? Holistic. Holistic in a sense that when we gather data about students' learning, gather all aspects of the learner that could be developed in the process of learning to cover affect, behavior, and cognition, or all learning targets set. And the last one guiding principle is ethical, which means that we gather data about students' learning, gather them with learners or parents' consent, and handle carefully the information when communicated. That's it. And now, with that guiding principles, we should also need to learn what should be the method and tools that we can use in assessing learning. So as what you can see in my presentation, there are columns which have 2 asterisks and 1 asterisk. Now remember about the learning targets, the 5 learning targets. These are actually the skills in terms of knowledge, reasoning, skills, product, affect, or the disposition. Now, there are methods as well as tools that can be used in assessing learning. By the way, the one that is labeled with 2 asterisks, which this only means that it's most appropriate. And the second one is it's possible. Now, for example, the tools that we could use when we assess our learners is an objective test. We also have written test. But in written test, we have to see to it that we have rubrics used. And then we could also use performance tasks. That's also the same as in written test. It needs rubrics. Another one is portfolio assessment, or we could have also self-report. Now, under knowledge, if you are using objective type of test, it says here that it is most appropriate. And it's possible to use written test, and it's also possible to use performance tasks, portfolio assessment, and self-report. For reasoning, it's possible to use objective test, and it's most appropriate to use written test, and it's possible to use portfolio assessment as well as self-report. So as what you can see here, there are some suggestions as to what a certain tool that could be used appropriately and what certain tool that could be passively used in a certain learning target. So we have here, again, objective test, written test, performance task, portfolio assessment, and self-report. And you have to see to it that in this certain tool, you also have to consider what learning target you would want to attain by your students. What learning target you would want from your students to attain. That's what I mean. Our next one is who could assess learning. As I said in my previous presentation, that face-to-face class is so far different from virtual class. It's because in what is this? In a virtual class, in an online class, we can now trust different stakeholders in assessing our learning. But we also have to consider if this particular stakeholder is most credible, or it could be that this stakeholder could be our possible assessor. Now, you also have to consider these learning targets and the people who could be the person to assess the student. So it could be a teacher, it could be ourselves, it could be peers, it could be parents, or it could be a personnel who is assigned in a certain area for our, maybe for our practice teaching or for immersion classes. Now, for the learning target knowledge, the most credible person who can assess learning is, of course, teachers, as well as reasoning, skills, product. And it could be passively, you could passively ask the teacher to assess the affect or the disposition of our students from the teacher. And for ourselves, we could possibly, assess ourselves in terms of knowledge, reasoning, skills, product. And the most credible or the most reliable person who can assess our affect or our disposition is, of course, ourselves. That has been emphasized even in psychology. We could even trust our peers, but these, we have to be, what is this? You have to be keen being assessed by our peers. In terms of skills and products, our peers can be the most credible one. And our parents as well. But there are some times that our parents are very, there are some, I know that there are some of you who have experience where parents are very competitive compared even to their students. Now, when they get to check the works of their students, they would want it that maybe the performance of their students, the written output of their students must be perfect. That is why they prefer to answer it by themselves, not allowing their children to answer it instead. And we could also use practicum site personnel who could assess us in terms of knowledge to the affect or disposition. Now, how do we assess learning in different modalities? This is now the question. How do we assess learning in different modalities? Remember, class, that we have these learning targets, which could be categorized as formative assessment. This formative assessment, class, guys, it's non-graded assessment. Example, we could use test as one of the samples or examples for formative assessment. We could use task. We could also have portfolio. And how do we assess them? What could be the technique? Now, the technique could be exercises, quizzes, actual doing, or what do we call as, since we are now in an online class, we can actually let our students do the actual demonstration through video recording. Now, there are labels here. The column with two asterisk and the other one with one. What does one asterisk imply? It implies that there is comparability of the condition for assessment for all students, as what you can see here in the next slide. And with two asterisks, there is comparability of the condition for assessment for all students is high. Now, in assessing learning in different modalities, we could have this technique. If it's school-based, home-based, remote offline, it could be home-based, remote online, that is synchronous, home-based, remote online, asynchronous, or it could be blended. So that's for the formative assessment. How do we assess learning? So just have to read on the what is this, the labels here, if it's really good or it's not that good. So remember, class, that one of the ways in assessing the learning of our students is we can use formative assessment. But formative assessment, these are non-graded. So when can we say that as an assessment should be recorded? So we can record the assessment, the results of the assessment of our students through summative assessment. Like for example, you would give them the test which would certify the knowledge of the students as well as their reasoning. Like for example, we could give them quarterly assessment, achievement test. Task, it could be task. Task could be used as a summative assessment. As what I have said earlier, you can do actual video. We could also use portfolio that would show the multiple measures. But you also have to consider the different learning modalities, if it's offline, online, or blended. Now let's proceed to the next one. So it is still under what to know. I mean what to check. Now we have here um, things to check when we have to to practice the different ways, strategies in different learning modalities. So our first question here is, what learning target does your school assess? So what would be the learning target? So as what you can see here, so in my presentation, the learning targets that we can see is actually the different assessment modalities. By considering those learning targets, the knowledge, the reasoning, the skills, products, and then the affect. So in assessment modalities, we have to know if the modality is pure school-based, if it's face-to-face with the teacher. So what would be your learning target in terms of knowledge, reasoning, skills, products, and affect? What about if your modality is pure home-based remote, offline, with or without parents' intervention? It could be a modality is a pure home-based but it's remote online, with or without parents' intervention. It could be blended school and home-based offline assessment. It could also be portfolio or evidence-based, technology-aided, combination, and other learning modalities. Next one is, how are these learning targets? How are these learning targets being assessed at present? How do we assess? So it could be with the use of different assessment approaches, with that different assessment modalities. As mentioned earlier, we can use objective test. We can use constructed response test, performance test, portfolio assessment, self-report. And in here, you also have to consider, is it good to use objective tests if you would want only to measure knowledge learning target? Is it good to measure performance test if your learning target is for reasoning? Now, another things to check here is what available tool that we can use in assessing students' learning. I know that everyone is very familiar already with the learning modalities system. We could use Google Forms or MS Forms, email, social media, video conference. Like we could use Google Classroom. In our university, most of us here teachers, we are using Google Classroom. Because when we use Google Classroom, we could just easily trace the students' output. I'm not saying that the other platforms, other online platforms are not that good. But you know what? Google Classroom, before we decided to use Google Classroom, we conducted first survey. And we found out that Google Classroom is the most friendly, what is this? Online classroom that all of us can use. So another thing is how to prepare the school, teachers, parents, and students to be ready on assessment as if transitions from face-to-face to online or other modalities. So we have to consider the different stakeholders as to what they would prepare. How would the heads prepare in the new normal education? For example, our principal, our teachers, our parents, and of course, our students. Now, for our principal, or all of the stakeholders must have this checklist. Example, like for the principal, what to do, would it be that you have to subscribe to secure an LMS as a platform for online instruction and assessment? So you have to check if it's a paper-based assessment or online assessment. Another thing to do, I would just be sharing some things to do. For example, in the part of principal, for the things he must have to do. Let the faculty divide the work, validate each other's work, and finalize it together. Would that be paper-based assessment or online assessment? Meet the parents and students to discuss requirements for instruction and assessment and things that they need to do. So what would be your action on that? Would that be a paper-based assessment or online-based assessment? For teachers, what to do? Review the current curriculum and pick the most essential ones. Is that done through online assessment or paper-based assessment? Another thing is identify assessment that would need synchronous administration, schedule it, and ready the tools and rubrics for use. Would that be paper-based assessment or online assessment? So you have this list. The one that I have been mentioning, those are just some of the sample items that a certain stakeholder must have to take into. For parents, we have to explore materials prepared. Not we have to, because I'm not yet married. So some of you may, prepare or explore the materials for instruction, either paper-based or online assessment. One thing that you also need to do as parent, it could be that you would know or monitor the child when scheduled for an online synchronous administration of assessment. You would also need to know the school's platform for communication, instruction, and assessment. And how would you do that? Is that paper-based or online-based? And of course, one last thing. We as students, what are we going to do to prepare? We have to have to perform the activities prepared by the teacher for home-based, offline, or online instruction and assessment. Is that paper-based or online? I believe it's both paper-based and online assessment. like what we should know, schedule, and tools of assessment that would need synchronous administration. So these are, by the way, the list that we must have to know in preparing today's education. So we have this checklist. If I were the principal, I need to do this and that, and this must be done in online, and this must be done in paper-based. So those are some of the preparations. And being me as a student, I really have to prepare myself. And I must have to know these items in this preparation. Next one. This one. What assessment tools need to be prepared at the beginning? Middle. It's very, what is this? It's very crucial because we have to be very keen with our learning activities. Starting from the very beginning of the school year, the middle of the school year, and then end of the school year. And what would be the assessment tools that we should use at the beginning, middle, and the end of the year, of the school year? Like for example, for the beginning of the school year, we can use pre-test or diagnostic test. From that, we also have to consider what modality is being preferred by the student. Is that school-based, home-based? And then you also have to consider the format. Would that be paper, computer-based? And then months of development. You have to check that one from January, February, March, April, until one school year. For middle of the school year, what would be the assessment tools? Formative, quarterly performance task, quarterly portfolio. End of the school year, we can use achievement test, culminating performance, or whole year portfolio. Remember, you also have to consider what modalities, what format, what particular month is that being administered or is going to be administered. Alright. Since I am using OBS in my presentation, I know that all of you have used maybe the OBS in your virtual classes. There's one software that I could share it with you. If some of you are familiar, good for you. If some are not yet familiar on this particular software, it is still good for all of us. Are you familiar with hot potato? This is not the natural hot potato that we would want to eat at home. I know that everyone is a bit hungry and just keep on holding. We are almost done in this presentation. Alright, what is this? Hot potato. It is, by the way, an offline assessment tool or activity that can be used by us as teachers in assessing our students. The hot potatoes, guys, include 6 applications that would enable us to create interactive, multiple choice, short answer, jumbled sentence, crossword, matching ordering, and gap fill exercises. So we have here the general term for each activity. We have J close, J match, J mix, J cross, and J quiz. For the J quiz, we can create multiple choice and short answer quizzes. Second one is J close. You can create gap fill exercises. For J match, we can create matching exercises including BROG and BROG types. J cross is we can make online crossword puzzles. J Masher, it's a tool for an automatic compilation batches of our hot potato exercises. To further understand what is this hot potato, let us watch this video.
Okay, welcome po sa ating bagong tutorial. Welcome po dito sa ating EdTech, One Click EdTech. So ngayon po, welcome po sa ating bagong tutorial. Welcome po dito sa ating EdTech, One Click EdTech. So ngayon po, ituturo ko po sa inyo kung paano gumawa ng interactive word puzzle using hot potato. So sige po, simulan na po natin. Okay, so unang-una po natin gagawin, install po natin yung ating hot potato. Right click lang po natin to. Then run administrator. Click OK. Next. Accept. Next. 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 Then next. Install. Okay. So click finish. So ito na po yung ating hot potato. So marami pong kasama dito sa hot potato. May Gmat, Jmix, Jcross, Jquiz, and Jglows. So pero ang gagamitin po natin ito yung Jcross. So click lang po natin itong Jcross para po sa ating interactive crossword puzzle. Okay, so ito na po yung ating Jcross. Ito na po yung window ng ating Jcross. Yan. So dito po natin gagawin yung ating interactive crossword puzzle. So una po natin gagawin, siyempre dapat na i-configure natin yung setup tulad po nung sa title, from, buttons, appearance, timer, at iba pa po. So yun. Sige po. Ang una po natin gagawin, i-configure po natin itong option. Configure. Okay. So yung title po ng ating crossword. So may na-ready na po ako dito sa aking notepad. Copy paste ko na lang po. So dito sa exercise title, so ito po ang lalagay natin. Copy paste ko na lang. Then yung instruction kung paano po sasagutin. So kasi po yung gagawin natin is about mga bansa sa Timog Silangang Asya. So yun po yung ating topic ngayon. So palitan ko lang po ito. So ito po yung instruction, sagutin ang crossword puzzle at tukuyin ang hinahanap ng mga bansa sa Timog Silangang Asya gamit ang kanilang kabisera bilang gabay. So pindutin ang bilang para sagutin. Okay. So okay na po yan. So ito po yung mag-a-appear dun sa ating crossword puzzle. So papakita ko lang po kung saan to makikita after na po natin magawa. Pag in-open na po natin sa ating browser. So yun po. Ito at ito po yung ginawa natin. Okay. Ito po yung title. So mamaya gagawin po natin yung title. Yung ginawa po natin ngayon, ito yun. Ito tsaka ito. Okay, so play na po natin. Tapos dito, across, ibig sabihin, pahalang. So huwag na po natin baguhin yung ating English na word on. Halang na lang. Halang. Then, pababa. Correct. Ano ba yan? O, tama ang iyong sagot. Iyong sagot. Antayin natin ito. Tama ang iyong sagot. Okay. So, sa isa naman, diba, may mali sa iyong sagot. Pag incorrect. May mali sa iyong sagot. Dito, pwede ditong tama ang pinili mo. Kung titik. So, yan, pwede siguro po yan your score. Okay. So, photo naman, check or titawag natin pagwasto. So, huwag natin tagalogin ng enter. Okay na po yan. Then, hint or titawag natin gabay. Gabay. Okay. So, ito, kahit hindi na po natin to i-click. Yan, check lang po natin to.